meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Here's where we will go. Nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the Speed Meter Steel, it's my newfangled automobile. Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill, and this is Mrs. Wild Bill. This is my wife, Toni. We are newlyweds, so next month it's going to be, 26 years?
Yes.
Yeah, newlyweds. And so today we are going to do a very different list. And because there are a lot of folks who watch this channel that, like myself, are enthusiasts and into vintage cars, own or have owned vintage cars, and are really into them. And so you dig that sort of part of my channel. Whereas there are folks like Toni, who really came to the channel not knowing anything. I mean, she had to. She married me, okay? But didn't really know anything about vintage cars at all, and wasn't really into cars, really, but did end up liking the stories. She's definitely a big part of this channel. When I started it, actually over 4 years ago, but it's been live for not quite 4 years. She's done a lot to help. She's my set designer, so when you look at the books back here and which ones are there, that's Toni.
Yep, that's me.
She also helps me with the, when I get done doing the research and writing and I craft a script, hand the script over to Toni. She does a dramatic reading or just reads it out loud, because being that she's not, intimately familiar with the topic like I am, if she reads it and struggles a bit with the reading, well, the problem's the script, and then I need to make some changes. So she does a lot to help out and put up with me. And so it was last week, I had an idea. I said, you know what, Toni, let's do this. I'll write a list of my personal top 10 favorite videos that have been put on Vintage Car History. Mind you, there's over 270 of them, so there's a lot to choose from. You make your list, and then we would compare our list. And so I went to my man cave and I wrote my list. I have it right here. And she went to her she shed. She wrote her list.
Yeah.
She has it right there. And boy, were our lists different. And I thought, you know what? I think this would be a good idea. So let's take a look at Wild Bill and Mrs. Wild Bill's top 10 favorite vintage car history videos. And so before we get to your top 10, Toni, how exactly did you craft this list? No spoilers now.
Okay.
But what were you aiming for? How did you put it together?
I was looking mainly at just being inspired by different people's stories and how they came from little and were able to, using things that were just mundane or things that we would think of as mundane, being able to make great things from them and being able to accomplish a lot. I think that's part of the American dream. I think that's those are things that inspire us all. And so I'm kind of looking at that. Also, a little bit of my eccentric side, like some of the funnier stories and the funnier episodes. I enjoy those. And just stories where just little things stand out that we can all relate to, even if we don't know anything about cars or how they're made or their history. We all enjoy a good story. We all enjoy the triumph of the human spirit. We all enjoy, humor and different things like that. So that's what my list is based on.
Well, awesome. Great. I think there's a lot of people who would probably agree that if they put a list of their own together would be based on that. My list is a little different, okay? Although that is actually important on my list. I do like the humor and the stories and things, and the little storytelling. For me, it's how deep did I have to dive, okay, in the research, and how far did I really have to go in crafting the script and putting it together. This is where I think Druckenifel and I are cut from the same cloth.
Right.
In this regard, we both love doing the research and learning more, because when I started this channel, I know a whole lot more now than I did then. Okay, just by making those deep dives onto the internet, into my library, into other resources, museums, and people that I know. So for me, those episodes where I really had to go deep into the history, those stand out to me. The story does, but I think thirdly for me, it's also the fan response. I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, I think in 4 years, I've had less than a half a dozen negative comments.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I deal with those. But some videos get more positive response than others, so so that matters to me too. So anyway, let's take a look at these lists. So Tony, what is your number 10 and why?
My number 10 is de Dion Bouton. I just think it's a neat story about, again, being inspired by the toy train and being able to make cars based on that. Who would ever think that would come from a toy? But somehow it did. So I like that story.
It is a cool story. I mean, and this was even before Carl Benz built the patent motor wagon.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he walked by a window and saw a toy and said, "I want a car. Whoever made that toy train can do it."
Right.
And hired, George Bouton.
Right. And who doesn't love toy trains? I mean, it's again, it's something everybody can kind of, oh, that's so cute. That's neat. And this is how the car came to be. So
Yeah.
it's kind of neat.
I think that's a great choice.
Mm-hmm.
All right, my number 10 is episode number 145, The First Car in Battle. I had to cut some of my own historical eye teeth on this one because, because this was really the first time that I did an episode where I'm, talking about an actual battle. I'm going into the battle tactics and strategy and who are the generals and everything else. And this is a little outside of the typical scope, but I've got to dive deep into that. I've got the Battle of the Marne to do. There's all sorts of stuff that was going on in the Middle East during World War I. I mean, most people don't realize that there were actual Indian wars happening in the United States in the West as late as 1916.
Mm-hmm.
And there were cars involved in those too. So for me, just how much of the history I had to go and really expand my own knowledge base, that mattered to me, and that made my number 10.
Mm-hmm.
And so, number 9, Tony.
Number 9 is Claude Johnson. I guess one of the reasons why, yeah, exactly. One of the reasons I like him, I guess, is he kind of reminded me of you, probably, because of just, coming in just like a tornado and just, I'm here, everybody, kind of thing. But it's neat that he was able to, he was that hyphen in Rolls-Royce,
yep.
Because their personalities were kind of different, and he was able to really get that car going because of who those two men were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rolls and Royce, the two men were as compatible as oil and water.
And he was able to make it happen because he was just that battering ram guy. And it was just, and yet at the same time, it's really funny. We all know somebody like that, not just somebody you're married to, but, somebody who just is the life of the party, can just, I'm not that person, but I appreciate.
You married that person.
Yeah, and I can appreciate when people can just, be the life of the party and just come on in and command attention like that. It's awesome. It's great that God made people that way, because if we were all the same, we'd be
boring.
Some of us would be unnecessary.
Yeah.
So.
Good choice. Okay, my number 9 is the special number 15, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I had so much fun writing that episode. It was a blast diving into the car itself and doing a little research into comparing, could this have actually happened? Was there a real Chitty Chitty Bang Bang? Finding out that actually there really was. Well, Chitty Bang Bang, Kabrowski's car, that actually inspired Ian Fleming. And a lot of really positive response in the comments from that video. It's like, wow, I didn't even know that the same dude who did James Bond did Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I enjoyed doing that episode. Mm-hmm. So that was my number 9.
Excellent.
Okay. Number 8, my love.
Number 8. Let's see what I have here.
What did the prettiest miss choose?
Gordon Bennett.
Gordon Bennett.
I'm sorry, but it's just, I have a very eccentric side, I guess. And I remember that this episode was the one where you actually were shirtless because
I took my shirt off.
Gordon Bennett's penchant for riding his carriage in the nude. And I just find that so hilarious. Obviously it wouldn't be in real life. A lot of things we think are funny that we see.
Well, he got kicked out of New York for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
rightfully so. and of course his poor bride, canceled their engagement, and again,
Yeah.
rightfully so.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of interesting though that as despicable of a character as he was still used
Mhm.
in God's providence to create the Bennett Cup and the Bennett race.
Yeah, and it was, and not just the Gordon Bennett auto race. He did
Right.
The yacht races. He
Right.
did balloon races. I mean, he
Right.
did quite a bit of stuff while being passed out naked on a yacht.
Yeah. So
Uh,
I'm sorry, but it was just a funny episode to me. So,
No, you're good. Okay, my number 8 is episode number 126, Charles Nash. And for me, this was one of those episodes where I really enjoyed doing the writing on it in history, and because it's an incredible story. And to bring his story out, to go from a slave, okay, in not the antebellum South, but this is like in Illinois. This is after Lincoln's War.
Right.
This is, and he's white,
right.
okay, and 6 years old, he's a slave.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, 35 years later, he'd be the president of General Motors.
See, that's.
I mean, that to me, that's just one of those compelling. Sometimes the compelling stories even make my list, and that was one of them.
Mhm.
Okay,
Excellent.
your number 7.
My number 7 is a Henry Ford episode, As Long as It's Black.
Okay, that's actually the Model T episode.
Oh, is it? The
Well,
Model
Henry Ford,
T.
yeah.
Okay.
As long as it's black.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I like that. I like the story about how that car came to be a car that everybody could use, the assembly line, that of the slaughterhouse.
Mhm.
That I thought that was really interesting. That if we can disassemble because the slaughterhouse works with disassembly, same thing can work with assembly. So I thought that was a neat story also.
Okay. And my number 7 was special episode number 3, The Motoring Monarchs. This was a very early one. This was only my third special episode, and we're up to like a special 50 something now, or 40 something. But a lot went into that production, and this was really the first time I really got into some historiography and really analyzing the industry, and which I would continue to do, in other episodes. But that's really the first one where I did that. And of course, the production with the music and everything else, and how I put that together. It was, I enjoyed making that episode. And so,
Good.
yeah, so that was my number 7.
Okay.
Number 6.
Henry Ford, just the general Henry Ford episode
Yeah,
about
episode
him
33.
being an innovator rather than an inventor. And this is important because when we think of Henry Ford, we automatically think, okay, he invented the car and that's all anybody knows about him. But that's
Or he invented, the assembly line.
right.
Or
Yeah.
something like, he didn't.
Right. But I mean, it's, but I just like the story about him, just how he grew up, how he, just his whole life, and how his main focus was just putting cars in the hands of that everybody could use, because the technology's growing. We need to put this in everybody's hands,
Yeah.
and
Right. It's
I like that.
great choice.
Mhm.
My number 6 was episode number 1, Nicholas Cugnot. And I think the reason is this is me learning how to do vintage car history. And, it's the basis of every episode, every video on this channel is based on episode number 1. I actually wrote that and had it filmed like 3 or 4 months before the channel went live.
Mhm. Wow. I remember now.
Yeah. And I worked on I did like 8 episodes already done before it went live. But that was my work for the channel, and it set the standard, and it was like, okay, I have to be at least this good from here on. The writing, the research has to be at least this good.
Right.
The production has to be at least this good. I don't think the research and writing has left that bar, but I know the production quality has certainly increased dramatically since then.
Right.
As we've invested more in it and gotten better equipment, and we now have an editor to help us out. So for me, episode number 1 is my number 6. All right. Pretties, your number 5.
That would be the last one in, I believe, in the Henry Ford trilogy. Ford versus Selden.
Ford versus Selden.
Yeah,
Okay.
if you want to call it trilogy. I don't think you meant it to be that way, but that's what I'm calling it.
Okay.
I like the intrigue of Selden and Whitney. Was it Whitney?
Yeah, it was William Whitney.
William Whitney. I want to say Eli Whitney. No, that's not right.
No, it was William Whitney. William Whitney, he is a different dude.
Yeah. So I just like how that just what you had said about the Illuminati and how things have not changed today, where elitists have one set of plans where this is their plan, this is what they're going to do. And then somebody like Henry Ford just comes in and throws a wrench in it and says, no, we're going to make this available to everybody. This is how we're going to do this. And just how it all went down, and how the more things change, the more they stay the same with these stories. So I really appreciated that story.
Great choice. My number 5, episode number 6, De Dion Bouton. And this was one of the funnest episodes to write because Albert De Dion was such a character, more than just the whole train thing. I mean, I even started that video with a joke about the movie Arthur from the 80s, about, and Arthur was told, what do you do? He says, I race cars, I play tennis, I fondle women, but I have weekends off and I have my own boss. And that's exactly what Albert De Dion was, a filthy, rich, spoiled brat that was so used to getting what he wanted. And that was just a fun one for me to write. It made my number 5. Okay, number 4.
Number 4 is Henry Royce. I was just really, really touched by this story because as an orphan, getting a job as a scarecrow, I mean, you think about what it takes to get work nowadays. I mean, and even as opposed to like 20 years ago, how difficult it is. And here this boy was, had the character as a young kid to say, I need to work. And got a job as a scarecrow. I just think that's just such a neat thing. And then as a paper boy, it showcases the need for a work ethic even in our young boys and young people, that needs to be implemented in them. And if it is, great things can happen when they become adults. So beautiful. I thought that was a good episode.
No, great choice. My number 4 was special number 9, The Rules of the Road. This was one I was looking forward to writing. I mean, and it's one of the longest scripted pieces on the channel. But going back to the ancient world and just describing how laws were created to manage roads, from the Egyptians to the Romans to the modern world. And that was just a deep historical dive for me to do. I really enjoyed writing that episode.
It was fun.
A lot of fun to do that one. So it
was a good one. I
made my number 4.
Yep.
Number 3.
Number 3 is Charles Nash. Again, that's my number 3. I just think it's neat that he had a terrible upbringing, and he was orphaned and sold into slavery and was able to cross state lines and go to Michigan. Yeah, and in those days, you could do that. You could cross state lines and have a whole new life. And just the way his life started out and how he became the vice president of Buick.
Yeah,
right.
And eventually president of General Motors. He bought a company, and the Rambler company created the Nash. The Nash Rambler, the little Nash Rambler.
Right.
That's him.
That is a cute song. And I love how we can know who the man is behind that song. That's just neat. That is neat.
Okay. At my number 3 was Ford versus Selden. And for me, I just loved the myth busting that I had to do, because there's so many conflicting resources about that whole episode. You have the Alem supporters, you have the Ford supporters, you got reporters saying one thing, reporters saying the other thing. I mean, there's even questions about the court transcripts themselves. I mean, there was accusations of doctoring the official document. I mean, it was crazy. And sorting that out to write that episode was a lot of fun. So made my number 3.
Good.
Okay. Your number 2.
Carl Benz.
Carl Benz.
And the reason I love that story is because his wife, Bertha, wanted him to get this thing off the ground. When are you going to be done with this? When is this going to be ready? And she said one day, you know what? Kids, we're going to Opa Oma's house. I'm going to drive this thing. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know, and again, she didn't have the conveniences we all do today when you pack the kids in the car. And even then it's kind of rough with kids, but she did it. And the car drove. She got down there and like, wow, okay, this actually works. His work paid off. But she had to be the one who said, we're gonna test this car. And I also love the fact that she came up with the idea for brake pads. I think that's such a womanly thing to do.
Well, the granny gear is named a granny gear because she came up with the idea, a lower gear for handling the hill climbs. Why? So you can go to grandma's house.
Right.
It's the granny gear.
Right. Right.
That was a great one. Okay, my number 2. It was episode 88 on Kamanosuke Uchiyama. What a deep dive that was. To not only just, in the history, but, in the writing, because, we're Occidental. I'm Occidental. We're, this was an Oriental culture. This is Japan in the Meiji period. How do you actually put perspective on that and bring context to the story of this man?
Right.
And I mean, good 3/4 of the episode is just bringing that context together.
It was an excellent episode.
So yeah,
very unique. I loved it.
I was proud of that one.
Mm-hmm.
I was
You
proud
should
of that.
be. It was great. I love it.
So yeah, that was my number 2. Tony, your number 1.
My number 1
Your number
is William Morris. Whoever has been through marital hardship, I think, can really appreciate this, as far as not marital hardship so much, but financial hardship. And having
Where the husband and wife actually
had to work together, and that is so difficult. That's such a hard. It's difficult to go through a hard providence like that and still, maintain your faith and maintain your composure and just work things out together. I love the fact that, and I mean, people might mock this today and say, oh, whatever. But I mean, the fact that she sold her jewelry to buy his tools back so that he could be productive again, that takes a tremendous amount of character we just don't see today in anybody, male or female, as far as somebody who's willing to sacrifice something that's important to them so that somebody else can have something and a future can be built from that. We just don't think long term today. We don't even think sometimes as much as about tomorrow or next week. And they had a long-term vision together.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was just such a wonderful statement about marriage. And again, the triumph of the human spirit, how a couple triumphed together, how she was willing to help her husband and work with him. And we know what that's like. We've dealt with that before, where, by God's grace, okay, we have to do this have to break some eggs in order to make some omelets. And that's hard, but she did it and he did it. And so That's my number 1.
Great choice. My number 1, episode 100, As Long as It's Black.
Okay, yeah, that was, whoops.
That's okay. We're done with the list anyway.
Yeah.
As Long as It's Black, for me, the depth of research I had to go through on that one and the crafting of that, because there are thousands of videos on YouTube about Model Ts. I mean, how am I going to write one that's going to stand out? And so some really deep historiography on that one, a lot of myth busting on that one. And it was very well received. I mean, a lot of people were saying that it's amongst the best documentaries on the topic out there on YouTube. So I think that's the best work I've ever done so far.
Excellent.
See if I can do some better.
Okay.
Okay, so that is the list that you have. This is the top 10 VCH videos as chosen by Wild Bill and Mrs. Wild Bill. Thank you, Tony, for joining us, and we will see you next week. Peace.